Hey guys, welcome back. This is a continuation of my main channel video, the top 10 reaches in the 2024 NFL Draft. If you haven't seen that one, make sure to check it out first, as it has an explanation of what constitutes a reach and also has the top 10 reaches of the draft, so it has some of the bigger names. Otherwise, let's get into it with our next player, and that's Penn State offensive tackle Caden Wallace, who found himself at 173 overall on the consensus big board, a 5th round pick. In the NFL Draft, he was selected by the Patriots at 68th overall in the 3rd round. According to consensus, that's a reach of 105 total spots. Wallace is a 24-year-old tackle with 6 years of experience, but consensus still viewed him as a project tackle with unrefined technique. Making the project a bit more difficult to put together is the fact that although he tested well, consensus scouts believed that he lacked adequate pocket range, slide quickness, and recovery ability. Additionally, at 6'4", he's in the 22nd percentile for height at tackle, and his arm length is 34 inches, which comes in at the 40th percentile. So if his technique is deficient after 6 years of college football, he's an average on-field athlete, and he doesn't have the raw tools to overcome those technique and athleticism deficiencies, what did the Patriots see in him? Well, notice how I said average on-field athlete when I was discussing the perspective of consensus scouts. That's because at the Combine, Wallace showed that he's a pretty good athlete for the position. With a 1.73 second 10-yard split, he put himself in the 80th percentile for tackles, his 40-yard dash of 5.15 seconds was in the 60th percentile, his vertical of 31 inches was in the 78th percentile, and his 116-inch broad jump was 94th percentile. Although he had a pretty poor shuttle time, he showed that he's generally a better athlete off the field than he showed on tape. Why is that a good thing if it doesn't translate? Don't take that tone with me because I'll tell you. In general, someone who struggles with their technique or is thinking about it too much won't play at full speed. Perhaps in their interviews, the Patriots found Wallace to be someone willing to learn, and they thought to themselves that if they were to clean up his technique a bit, he'd start playing more confidently and he'd play at his full speed, like he tested off the field, making him a quality starter for them, which is definitely what you want to see out of a 3rd rounder. Also, although he still isn't the most refined player ever, he wasn't really considered a draft prospect until late in his 6-year college career, and even then he was only a late round prospect. Consensus may argue that this is a bad thing, but the Patriots may argue that this means that Wallace has been committed to developing and has in fact continued to develop, even if it took him a little bit longer. My speculation of the Patriots' perspective is supported by a quote by Elliot Wolf, the director of scouting for the Patriots, who stated, quote, "He was a guy that we felt was athletic enough to possibly make the switch over on the left side. Really good pass protector, really took a huge step forward this year as a 4-year starter. Athletic, can bend, strong, powerful, tough. He could possibly play guard. We think that he could be a 4-position guy, but definitely feel like he could play on the left side," end quote. So now, with both perspectives discussed, we'll have to wait till later, but for now, he's the 2nd biggest reach in the 2024 NFL Draft. Next stop, Oregon safety Evan Williams, whose rank on the consensus big board was 210 overall, making him a 6th round consensus value. But in the NFL Draft, he was selected in the 4th round at 111 overall by the Packers, resulting in a consensus reach of 99 spots. Williams is a 5-year college player, playing at Fresno State for his first 4 years before transferring to Oregon for his 5th season. According to consensus scouts, his upside was seen as a backup safety or a starting special teamer. I actually wasn't even able to find a consensus scouting report that believed he would become an NFL starter someday, which explains why a 4th round pick is pretty rich. The issue with him is his size and speed. At 5'11" and 200 pounds, he's below the 30th percentile in both height and weight, and his 1.55 second 10-yard split and 4.6 second 40-yard dash are unimpressive for a safety. On top of that, consensus scouts were worried about his coverage instincts and his tackling ability. With regard to tackling, many scouts agreed that Williams struggled to break down in space and to wrap up ball carriers. These findings are supported by his stats, as in Williams' last 3 seasons, he had a total of 40 missed tackles in 36 games. But on the flip side of the coin, we don't even need to speculate as to the Packers' perspective, because we have a direct quote from Sam Seal, a Packers scout, who stated, quote, "He's smart, he's instinctive, he's a good kid, and he makes tackles. He makes plays around the ball, he's always around the ball, he's a football player." So the Packers seem to disagree with the consensus scouts and the stats as to Williams' tackling ability. But regardless, Williams is a very versatile player. In 2023, 290 of his snaps were in the box, 271 were at free safety, and 165 were in the slot. He's also played 466 career special team snaps, and in 2023 alone, he had 5 sacks on 20 pass rush attempts. So from the Packers' perspective, if they've watched the tape and disagree with the criticisms of his tackling, and then they also see his versatility, I think it's fair that maybe he'd be worth trading up for in the 4th round, as they in fact did. Whether they're correct is a question for later. Now we move on to an LSU player with the last name Jefferson, but probably not the one you're thinking of. Instead of Justin, it's Jordan Jefferson, an interior defensive lineman who is ranked as a 6th rounder by consensus, 208 overall. In the 2024 NFL Draft, he was selected in the 4th round, 116th overall, by Trent Ball Can't Lie Baalke and the Jags, resulting in a 92 spot reach from Jefferson's consensus ranking. If there's one thing that consensus and the Jags can agree on, it's this. Jordan Jefferson is an explosive mover on tape, both off the snap and in the short area. Lance Zierlein of NFL.com actually described his first step as cat-like, which is surprising because at 313 pounds, he's in the 70th percentile for weight. Oh look, here's another thing that everyone can agree on. He has a powerful upper body. In describing his power, Trent Baalke stated that Jefferson consistently had great knockback at the point of attack and dominated his area at the point. Trevor Sikkema of PFF would agree, stating Jefferson's biggest strength is his strength. His power shows up in how he dictates contact, enabling him to stack and shed with control and violence. So what we've got is a player that we all agree on is an explosive mover and very strong. So why the big discrepancy in the rankings, boys? It seems to be just about everything else, starting with hand usage. As part of the quote I said above, Baalke said that Jefferson uses his hands extremely well, but consensus scouts would disagree. Trevor Sikkema said Jefferson is slow to disengage. Matt Holder of Bleacher Report said that Jefferson doesn't work the hands or use counter moves as a pass rusher. And Lance Zierlein simply said that Jefferson needs to improve his hand usage as a run defender and pass rusher. Alongside the arguments about his hand usage, consensus is concerned about Jefferson's effort, high pad level, and lack of leg drive. In totality, these concerns, in the eyes of consensus, make Jefferson a poor pass rusher and an average run defender, which is supported by his advanced stats. Jefferson's PFF pass rush grade in 2023 was 61, compared to a 72.4 run defense grade, and his pass rush win rate was far below average with a 3.5%. His 4 hurries in 2023 tied for 396 in college football. Alongside the concerns about his tape, he didn't really test all that well despite being considered a very good athlete for his position. His 10-yard split was in the 31st percentile, 40-yard in the 44th percentile, vertical in the 63rd percentile, and broad jump in the 28th percentile. The only thing that he really excelled at was the weightlifting portion, where his 34 reps were in the 87th percentile. His arm length, hand size, and height were all slightly below average, so in the eyes of consensus, he was really just a guy who flashes raw athletic traits on tape, but wasn't really refined enough to use them to make an impact. But obviously Baalke believes differently. As I mentioned in the starting graphic, a lot of the team perspectives will require some speculation on my part, but I imagine the thought process from the Jags' perspective is that if they can give him a go-to move and refine his hands a bit, he can use his above-average athleticism and power to be a dominant force. He's also a very secure tackler, with a missed tackle rate of under 8% for his career, so if he's able to use his power or athleticism to get into the backfield, the Jags are confident that he'll likely finish off his plays. Now we have Illinois tight end, just the tip, Raimann, who was ranked 161st overall on the consensus big board, which is a 5th round value. In the NFL draft, he was selected 82nd overall in the 3rd round by the Arizona Cardinals, thus making him a 79 pick reach in the view of consensus. I'm not gonna lie to you, it's not even slightly difficult to guess why the Cardinals may have liked him. At 6'5", 271 pounds, Raimann is in the 60th percentile for height and 95th percentile for weight. But even with that great size, he destroyed the combine, earning himself a 9.92 RAS score, which ranks him 10th all-time of all combine participants at tight end. But despite being an excellent athlete with great size, he's a block-first tight end who prides himself on his physicality, even explicitly stating that his favorite part of football is mauling defenders as a blocker. So basically, this guy's an every down player. He's already a willing and able blocker, and he has the athletic traits to be an excellent receiver. So why was he so far down on the consensus big board? Production and his ability to separate as a route runner. As a receiver, his season high for receptions is 19, which he obtained in both 2022 and 2023, and his season high for yards is 203. He also only saw 24 targets in 12 games this most recent season. Derek Klassen of Bleacher Report and Reception Perception put it as follows, quote, Raimann is unproven and somewhat limited as a receiver right now. For as well as Raimann moves at his size, he doesn't have legit field stretching speed. Raimann also lacks some of the foot quickness and agility to suddenly uncover himself from defenders, end quote. That's just one example obviously, but from my research it appears that consensus didn't think he showed a good enough ability to separate or display his athleticism on the field to be a contributor in the pass game. If that's indeed the case, it makes sense that a blocking tight end skill set would be valued closer to a 5th round pick rather than the 3rd round. but the Cardinals think there's more to unlock. And now we're gonna hop on over to Missouri linebacker Tyron Hopper, who was ranked at 169th overall on the consensus big board, a 6th round pick. In the NFL draft, he was taken in the 3rd round by the Packers at 91st overall, resulting in what consensus sees as a 78 pick reach. Looking at consensus reports for Hopper and his advanced stats, I think it's pretty clear why consensus viewed him as a 6th round pick. In its simplest terms, there's 3 elements to playing linebacker: coverage, run defense, and pass rush, and consensus didn't believe he was particularly good at any of them. In coverage, consensus scouts believed that he was too over-aggressive and that he lacked the requisite instincts. This shows in his 39.6 PFF coverage grade this most recent season, where he allowed a 70% completion percentage against him and a 103.6 passer rating against him. As a run defender, or even just as a tackler in general, consensus scouts say that he's late to diagnose plays, he overruns ball carriers, and that he lacks the requisite strength to bring down ball carriers, which shows in his egregious 31 missed tackles in the last 2 seasons combined. This most recent season, his 22.7% missed tackle rate was the 4th highest amongst draft-eligible linebackers with at least 440 snaps, and the 3 players ahead of him weren't even drafted. Pass rushing seems to be his best skill set, as he was tied for 29th in this draft class with 17 pressures, and he finished the 2023 season with 3 sacks and a respectable 64.2 PFF pass rushing grade. Alongside not really being great on the field, he had poor measurables in testing, which I'll show on screen now. As you can see, he's below average in height and weight, doesn't have the arm length or hand size that you want to see for someone whose primary skill set appears to be pass rushing, and he generally struggled in most of his athletic tests besides the vertical and the broad. Consensus analysts did believe that his athleticism on the field was much better than he tested. Most of them described Hopper as a guy with the athleticism to develop in a way that he could begin to stick with players in coverage, and they believed he had the range to become a good run stopper if he could clean up his tackling and become a bit better at diagnosing plays. But he was viewed as a 6th rounder because he'd need a lot of development to get to that point, and they didn't really believe he had shown the skills on the field quite yet. This pick particularly came under a lot of scrutiny because he was taken ahead of Peyton Wilson, who I discussed in my draft folders video, Cedric Gray, and potential DBs to fill the Packers' need at cornerback, such as TJ Tampa, Cam Hart, Chris Abrams-Draine, and Kalen Carson, for example. Now, according to the Packers, they loved his physicality and athleticism, it seemed. Packers GM Brian Gutekunst stated, quote, "He's really physical. He can run, but his stopping power when he takes on blockers is pretty impressive. He ran fast, so that was pretty good for us, and he's an explosive athlete, so it all came together," end quote. I'm sure when the Packers saw him, they did all come together. In the eyes of the Packers, it seemed that they believed there was a lot of athletic traits to build upon what Hopper showed in college, and that they believed he was a stronger athlete. In theory, I could see it. If he has the athleticism to be good in coverage and run defense, he could become an excellent player in all 3 phases if he were to develop his instincts and clean up his tackling, and perhaps in the interviews with him, the Packers thought that he was that guy. Actually, if you look back only 1 season, you can see the vision, as in 2022, Hopper had an 84.8 PFF pass rushing grade, racking up 30 pressures and 4 sacks, along an 80 PFF coverage grade, allowing only a 66.8 passer rating against him in coverage. Although he missed 14 tackles that season, you do start to see the vision come to fruition a bit more, a player who can excel in all 3 phases. Perhaps that's why the Packers had a 2nd round grade on him. Consensus disagrees, which is why they had a 6th round grade, but we'll have to wait for the revisit on this one to see who's right. Next up, we have the LB from ND, Notre Dame linebacker Marist Liufau, who is viewed by consensus as a 5th round pick, coming in at 165 overall on the consensus big board. In the NFL draft, he was taken in the 3rd round at number 87 overall, constituting a reach of 78 spots. Interestingly enough, the Cowboys were apparently so into him, they rejected several trade offers for the 87th pick because they were worried that he'd be taken if they traded down. It seems that the love from the Cowboys side is spearheaded by their new defensive coordinator, Mike Zimmer, who spoke glowingly about Liufau, stating, quote, "He's brilliant. He catches on really quick. He wants to be so good and so intense that he's almost too much at it right now. The other thing is I think he's a really good pressure player, and I think having that with Parsons and another pressure player that's a linebacker, or he can move somewhere else and Parsons can move somewhere else. I think those pieces add to confusion for the offense, plus he's a really good rusher." Okay, I gotta be honest with you, like half of that quote I had no idea what the fuck he was saying, and one of those sentences just didn't go anywhere, but you kinda get the basic gist of what he was talking about. Essentially what it shows us is that in the Cowboys' eyes, they love his instincts and his pass rushing ability, and they believe he has the intelligence to continue to develop in other areas areas of the game. It also makes sense for the Cowboys to have drafted a linebacker with the sudden retirement of Leighton Vander Esch and having to start an aging Eric Kendricks this upcoming season. So what leads to the discrepancy between the Cowboys' view of him and Consensus's view? Well, Consensus disagrees on his instincts, and a lot of the main problem that Consensus has with him seems to be that they believe he's both slow to diagnose plays and then over-aggressive to get to the ball when he does diagnose plays, making it hard to contribute regardless of how he processes the play. His over-aggressiveness may have been what Zimmer was referencing when he said that Liufau is, quote, so good and so intense that he's almost too much at it right now, end quote. A lot of Consensus scouts did agree with Zimmer, loving Liufau's violence and motor, but questioned his ability to start in year one because they didn't think he had the instincts, coverage ability, or run-stopping ability to be a high-level starter. The main question for Liufau seemed to be whether a coach could rein him in and get him to play at his full potential without being over-aggressive, exposing gaps in run defense, leaving receivers open in coverage, or missing tackles, as he had done 17 times in the past 2 seasons. Many were highly critical of the pick because of who he was taken in front of, with the main criticism being that there were year one ready starters and Liufau will take multiple years to develop, at least according to Consensus. Still, intensity is not something that can be coached into a player, and Zimmer believes that, alongside the intensity Liufau shows on the field, he has the intelligence to pick up his defense and run it from day one. Zimmer is notoriously a guy who hates rookies, and he's been praising Liufau since they drafted him, so the fit alone could prove Consensus wrong. Coming in our next spot is Illinois offensive lineman Isaiah Adams, who is ranked as a 5th round draft pick by Consensus, 139 overall. In the NFL draft, he was picked in the 3rd round, 71st overall by the Arizona Cardinals, resulting in a 68 pick reach versus the Consensus board. Adams was a really surprising pick in the NFL draft, not only because of his value, but because he saw his name called before several interior offensive line prospects who were way higher on the Consensus board, such as Cooper Beebe, Christian Haynes, and Dominique Pooney. There's a few reasons why he fell behind those guys in the eyes of Consensus. First, when training camp starts, he's going to be 24 years old, so he's definitely on the older side for prospect. Although he's played 6 years of college football, only 2 of them were for a Division I program, as he spent 2 seasons in Canada and 2 seasons in JUCO before playing with Illinois. In the last 2 seasons at a D1 program, he's been a pretty atrocious pass blocker, allowing 13 sacks on 992 pass blocking snaps. In 2023, he gave up 9 sacks on 518 pass blocking snaps, which was the most sacks allowed by any offensive lineman in the 2024 draft class. In fact, the next highest number of sacks allowed in 2023 by a drafted player was 5, which was by Nathan Thomas, who was picked in the 7th round by the Cowboys. So Adams allowed 4 more sacks than the next drafted player, who was taken in the 7th round. Alongside the stat, his pass block efficiency rating was the 8th worst in the whole class. As a run blocker, he graded out well, but not amazing, with a 73.2 run blocking grade on 323 run block snaps. So from Consensus's perspective, older player with poor production as a pass blocker, limited experience in D1 football, and still considered a developmental prospect at 24 years old? Well, what's the Cardinals' perspective? To be honest, I'm not totally sure. He has versatility, as he split time between guard and tackle in his 2 seasons with Illinois, and he could be a good developmental depth piece for the Cardinals on the interior, but is that really worth a 3rd rounder? No, not really. In discussing the pick, Cardinals GM Monty Ossenfort said the following, quote, interesting situation. Played guard for them last year, was forced to go out and play right tackle for them this year. Really impressive of him to do that. Not his natural position, but went out there and held up. Then going down to the Senior Bowl, had a good week down at the Senior Bowl, moved back inside to guard, played mostly guard down there. Comes from a good program, got a great relationship with Coach Bielema down there, spoke very highly of Isaiah, so we're excited to add him in the group. He also added, quote, he's got a higher ceiling to go because he is relatively a newcomer to big-time college football. In talking through with Coach Bielema, he sings his praises, end quote. Professional yapper, this one. So it appears that the Cardinals' reasons for picking Adams are really more based on things unknown to the public, such as interviews with Adams himself and people who know Adams, as well as his performance in drills outside of his game film. Ossenfort seemed to be particularly drawn to the fact that his college head coach spoke highly of him and that Adams was willing to sacrifice to the team by playing out of position for them this past season. It appears the Cardinals believe the ceiling is still there for him to develop. Consensus analysts don't necessarily disagree that there is some upside, but it appears Consensus analysts are more hesitant about the fact that Adams is older and has struggled as a pass blocker so far. Now we move on to Texas A&M interior defensive lineman McKinley Jackson, ranked as the 148th player on the consensus big board, a 5th round pick in the NFL draft. He was selected in the 3rd round by the Bengals, 97th overall, which according to consensus was a reach of 51 picks. Jackson is seen as someone who will fill the Bengals' need at true nose tackle, lining up right over the center. However, consensus has their doubts about how that'll play out. The biggest gripe I've seen about Jackson's tape so far is that his tape's very inconsistent. However, when he does win, he tends to win with quickness, which is not inherently a bad thing, but as a nose tackle, he'll be tasked with holding the point of attack and anchoring against double teams on rundowns and pushing the pocket on pass downs. There are concerns about his ability to do both of these things, as consensus analysts have questioned his ability to anchor and hold his gap as a run defender, as well as arguing that he doesn't have the arm length or the strength to consistently push the pocket. Even winning with quickness, analysts also don't think he has the hand usage to consistently disengage from blocks in all phases of the game. For these reasons, most analysts put his upside as a rotational starter, but there weren't many who saw him as much more. For example, Dane Brugler of The Athletic and Lance Zierlein of NFL.com saw Jackson as a 6th round pick. From the Bengals' perspective, I'm not sure how much of this they'd even really contest about his scouting profile, as the speculation is that they picked Jackson mainly on account of there not being a lot of nose tackle talent left and their need to fill DJ Reader's absence. This is supported by Zach Taylor when he said, quote, "He's a guy we've talked a lot about. He fits a good spot for us. 330-pound nose guard. There's not a lot of those in the draft. He's a guy that we had rated highly, and he was sitting right there for us in the 3rd round, so it was the right spot to take him," end quote. They really haven't said much about him that I can find, so it's a bit difficult to speculate as to why there was such a large discrepancy between consensus and the NFL. Either way, we'll find out in a few years. And next up is Rice wide receiver Luke McCaffrey, who is ranked as a 5th rounder on the consensus big board, 142 overall. In the NFL draft, he was selected 100th overall, resulting in a consensus reach of 42 spots. Let's start with the Commanders' perspective first, because we have to address the elephant in the room. Luke McCaffrey is the brother of Christian McCaffrey, one of the most dynamic players in the NFL, and son of Ed McCaffrey. But crazily enough, Luke McCaffrey, despite being several inches taller than his brother, ran faster than him, as Luke had a 4.46 second 40-yard dash compared to Christian's 4.48. No offense to Ed dude, but you're not even in this competition with a 4.69. So we've established that he's got the NFL bloodlines, but another thing that the Commanders likely liked about Luke is his very quick development at the wide receiver position in such a short period of time, showing his dedication and his ability to pick up new skills quickly. Despite starting his collegiate career as a quarterback, McCaffrey converted to a wideout prior to the 2022 season, meaning he's only played wide receiver for 2 years. In just his 2nd year at wide receiver, McCaffrey was named an All-AAC player after hauling in 71 catches for 992 yards and 13 touchdowns. He also had 17 contested catches, the 2nd most, a 97th percentile grade against zone coverage, an 82.7 PFF receiving grade, and he had 14 yards per reception. Washington GM Adam Peters noticed how quickly he's developed and believes he'll keep going up from there, stating that McCaffrey was skilled at, quote, being able to get open, and if he wasn't open, he was making contested catches. He moves so well. He moves like a guy who's maybe 5'10" in terms of his quickness. Seeing him get better and better throughout the process tells us that he's only going to get better, end quote. And speaking of quickness, McCaffrey's testing at the combine was very good, as his 1.52 second 10-yard split was 76th percentile, his 4.46 second 40-yard dash was 69th, nice, his 6.7 second 3-cone was 87th percentile, and his 4.02 second shuttle was 91st percentile. So ultimately, there was a lot to like for the Commanders. Comes from a successful NFL family, good athlete, quick learner who's dedicated to his craft, and strong hands. But all is not so well in the view of consensus. Although McCaffrey did put up excellent numbers this most recent season, he did so at a school in the CUSA, a lower level of competition, making his jump to the NFL more significant. Although consensus analysts indicate that he did improve as a wide receiver, he still had a long way to go, and because he played against a lower level of competition and lower level athletes, his unpolished technique just didn't negatively affect him that much, not really hurting his production. Specifically, many analysts pointed to his lack of ability to create space at the line of scrimmage to get pass press coverage, and his inability to separate during routes. Everyone in the NFL is a good athlete, so to separate, you generally need to be a polished route runner or an even better athlete than the people who are already some of the best athletes in the world. Consensus analysts doubt that he can be the latter, so they believe he'll need more time to work on the fundamentals of the position. That's not to say that they don't believe he can't do it, but the rankings don't lie as to what media analysts believe his value was. And now we turn our attention to K-State tight end Ben Sinnott. who was ranked as the 3rd round pick, 88th overall on the consensus big board. However, in the NFL draft, he was drafted by the Commanders in the 2nd round at number 53 overall, resulting in a consensus reach of 35 spots. It was particularly surprising because he was taken over consensus tight end 2, Ja'Tavion Sanders. Consensus describes Sinnott as one of these chess piece type players who could be used in a lot of different ways, as a fullback in the backfield, inline as a tight end, or in the slot as a wide receiver. And he's a solid player at each of these positions, but not necessarily anything to write home about. I've watched a ton of film this year, but I haven't watched any of Sinnott's film at the time of this writing and recording of this video, although I'll probably watch some clips to edit in for you guys. Without seeing him, the vibe that I've been getting from reading his scouting reports is that he's like Ben Skoranek with some more upside. But that's just my interpretation of the consensus scouting reports. I could be completely wrong. Analysts do say that he does fit best as an H-back second tight end hybrid who could be out on the field every play because he's good enough at blocking to not tip the offense's hand to the defense whether the play is a run or pass, but he's a good enough pass catcher that the defense needs to account for his receiving ability, although he's not amazing in either of those categories. However, consensus just doesn't think he has the separation ability and the ball skills to really provide more than solid value as a receiver. If consensus is right, the 88th overall spot on the consensus big board is actually kind of generous for this molded player, as it's not really a role that's highly valued in the NFL. However, the Commanders seem to believe that Sinnott is more than just this average jack of all trades, master of none, as they believe he has way more potential. Adam Peters spoke highly about Sinnott's catching ability and his ability to get open against man coverage, as well as his ability to run after the catch. Based on what they've said, it seems that the Commanders believe he has more value as a receiver than consensus does, which would obviously raise his value because he'd be adding all the versatility of being able to line up anywhere, as well as the receiving capability to threaten defenses no matter where he lines up. I wish I had more to say here, but Sinnott is labeled as a massive reach, and he's up there on several lists I've seen of the biggest reaches in the draft. And after all of that, if you've watched both videos, you've now heard about the top 20 reaches in the 2024 NFL Draft. Still think I missed someone? Let me know below. Would really appreciate a like and subscribe both here and on the main channel. Sorry for having to split up both videos, but the raw audio was over an hour long, and I just really didn't want the video to be that long, so I had to split them in half. If you watch both videos, thank you guys so much. I really do appreciate it. It means a lot to me. And I'm also really excited to put out my next video, where I'll be drafting as the 33rd team in the NFL Draft, and also reviewing my 33rd team draft from last year. As for this video, that'll be it. Thanks guys, later.